Hand it over to Nick to start today's session.
Thanks, Tara. So welcome, everybody. So just a bit about myself before we get into it. So I look after direction and strategy for quality assurance and customer services at Avenza Systems. Many of you may know me already from conferences, from personal visits to your offices. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you about MAPublisher 10.2. So Jeff will be along shortly. So Jeff looks after quality assurance for MAPublisher. So he really heads up all of the QA needs that we have around this product. He's also the on-site trainer for MAPublisher and buzzes around North America, teaching you guys all of the cool things that are in the product. So I guess the first thing I wanted to say was, we really need you guys as customers to really help us shape our products into the future. So we have multiple connections that we have to you. You ask for things and we listen. Most of what we do comes from working with you as our customers. We do receive feature requests and workflows through our stellar technical support team, who work tightly with our product management group to be the bridge from development to customer. For new MAPublisher customers, we proactively reach out to assist them in their onboarding experience to ensure that we are continuing to solve the problems that led them to invest in us in the first place. Our customer services team schedule regular aftercare check-ins to ensure that our solutions are meeting needs and that our customers are receiving what they need from us. We seek to attend the shows and conferences where we can meet you guys, cartographers, and stay aligned with developments in the industry. We always attend NACIS in October every year. This year is in Norfolk, Virginia. Just yesterday, we got confirmation that our presentation has been accepted. So myself and a colleague will be there in October to talk to you guys there. We also attend other cartographic conferences worldwide. We lean significantly on our resellers to attend, the conferences and shows that are outside of North America. We have forums, so talk with us, other MAPublisher customers at avenza.com/forums. As I mentioned, we do personal visits. I look to visit key customers every year to discuss workflows, pain points, and brief you on what's new and what we are working on next. For customers with active maintenance, we do send tips and tricks on what's new information on a regular basis, and your feedback is obviously appreciated. I'm sure a few of you have received invitations to contribute to surveys in the past. If we have been debating a roadmap decision in-house, we often go straight to you as customers for the feedback that we need before we make our decisions. As I mentioned, through Jeff, we do train, we have on-site and remote options available, and we always get great ideas from students there. If a customer has submitted a feature request to us, which is a significant change, we will engage with them prior to its release to get critical feedback to ensure, what we did has been architected in a manner which will meet their needs. So now we're on Adobe Exchange. We're also on Capterra, so feel free to visit those sites and provide us with reviews and feedback because we take all of these things on board. And obviously webinars, doing this today, the Q&A, the comments that we see in the chat are also, key to helping us craft solutions that work for you. So 10.2, so, it's been out a few weeks now. I guess high level, these are some of the things that we put into the release. We have done a lot of work over the last year to make the import of map data more efficient. You've seen 10.0, 10.1, and now 10.2. In 10.0, we added a spatial filter to the importers. Very simple use case there. You only want to import the area of interest within the selected data sets that you need, rather than have to import all of the art and crop later. So, lots of efficiencies there. In 10.2, we've extended our import filters so that for file formats, you can now choose what specific features or layers you want to import based on their attributes. For instance, just give me the highways within this data set, as it's all I need for the map I'm making. This reduces the import time and post-import work. Our customers and obviously us felt that filtering before import was the most logical way forward. In 10.2, we also added the means to simplify artwork prior to import. Illustrator has a well-known limitation that paths can only contain a maximum of 32,000 points. So while graphic designers would, for the most part, not encounter an issue with this, MAPublisher users who work with large GIS data want more control over how art is imported, particularly when the data is heavily detailed and needs to come in its entirety with logical simplification. The use case we are aware of is a customer having to maintain 2 copies of their source data, one the data in its entirety and the other with it broken into tiles, just so it can be imported to Illustrator properly. So Jeff will take you through the top 2 items shortly. A huge change for the product we made in 10.2 is now it can be installed and run in Simplified Chinese. We do have a booming market in China, in mainland China, and as such, we needed to ensure that Chinese Illustrator could be run with Chinese MAPublisher. So now we have the framework in place. We are well set to add additional languages into the future. If you print to CMYK plates, our style widgets now contain overprint options so that black detail is not knocked out of the other 3 plates in the printing process, if this applies to you. If you make park maps, no problem. With assistance from Tom Patterson, I'm not sure if he's with us today, at the National Park Service, we now have the NPS 2018 symbol set installed into Illustrator when you install MAPublisher. If you import many different file formats interchangeably, we now have a preference where the file format list box in the importer can be set to show all file formats by default each time you go back there, rather than being set to the last used. So Jeff will show you that too. If you always work with just a few projections, to save you tons of time, we have changed the coordinate system picker to just show recently used by default. So now over to Jeff, who will give you a demo of filter by expression on import, simplify on import, and some of the other useful changes we made in 10.2 through working with you, our customers.
All right, thank you, Nick. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen with everyone. And I will switch over to Illustrator. So the first feature I'm going to go over today is the what we've renamed the layer filter. And so I've opened the import panel, and you can see here that if I expand from the simple import mode to the advanced mode, that I no longer see the spatial filter and attribute filter options. And because we've added our simplification...
Sorry, Jeff, I can't see your screen.
Oh, no? Okay.
I'm seeing it.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, maybe it'll bounce back for me in a minute.
Yeah, if you could just try sharing again, Jeff, just in case.
Sure. Okay. How's that? Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So I've got the import dialog open. And as I mentioned, we've consolidated the spatial filter and the attribute filter into a sub dialog because we felt our import dialog was becoming too large and we wanted to use the space wisely. So we've added a filtering section, and once my data set loads, I'll see a hyperlink allowing me to specify my filtering options. So you can see I've got a world data set here in the background, and if I'm, for example, going to be making a map of Canada, rather than importing the entire data set, I'm just going to specify a filter to just import the features that are in Canada. So as I mentioned, here's the filtering hyperlink. So when I click on that, I get 3 filtering options. And I'm only going to be going over 2 today, as Nick mentioned, the layer filter, which used to be called attribute filter, and the simplification. So for now, the layer filter, I just click the checkbox to enable it. And I'm going to click on the edit layer filter to begin specifying what I want. So my data set has 5 layers contained within it. And I'm going to be making a very simple map that will contain the border or the outline of Canada, the provinces, main roads, populated places, and even though I've got this lakes data set included, I can just drop it completely by unchecking the include checkbox for that layer. For the other layers, I'm going to specify a unique expression to each layer, and only those features that satisfy the expression will be imported. So for the states and provinces, I'll just start with the topmost layer. I only want to import the features that have an attribute value of Canada. So I can either type in the expression manually if I know the attribute names and values, or I can use the expression builder to fill in and help build the expression for me. So beforehand, I did a little digging into the data, and I know the attribute I want to use is the name underscore 0. So I double click, it adds it to my expression. And as I mentioned, I only want to add the features that have the value Canada. So once I click OK, you can see that the expression now populates the expression field. And you can see that there are a large number of attributes included in this data set for this layer. I don't need all of them. And well, this is a feature that was included in 10.0. I have the option to select which attributes I actually want to import. And again, beforehand, I found out that the name underscore 1 attribute actually contains the names of the provinces. So for example, Ontario, Quebec, that's where I'll find these attribute values. So I'm going to actually include that one attribute when I do my import. The next layer is the populated places. I'm going to filter out some of my attributes. So I only want to include the name underscore town, the admin underscore 1. This is the province that it's located in, and then the population underscore max. So that will give me the population value as well. Now this point data set is quite dense. I don't want to bring in every single populated place within Canada. I only want major cities. So I can build an expression, once again, using these attributes. So if I go admin equals Canada, I can just type it in rather than go find it. And I also want to bring in the cities that have a population greater than 500,000 people. Once again, I click OK, and it adds to my dialog. For my roads data set, I only want to bring in the feature class, the type, the name, and the length in kilometers. So I've got 4 attributes for this layer. And in preparation for the webinar, I obviously did a little run through to make sure everything was working properly. And this expression library will save any previously used expressions within this document. So for my roads layer, I use the expression SOV underscore A3 equals CAN. So I'm going to be able to reuse this expression from a previous import and insert it automatically for me. And lastly, I mentioned I was going to be bringing in the outline or the border of Canada. And I know that the expression needed to just bring in Canada is country equals Canada. And I'm going to bring in all the attributes for this layer. So I've got my data set up and ready to go, and I'm going to click OK. If I'm going to be importing this data set frequently, and I only want to focus on Canada whenever I'm making these maps, I can save this attribute filter and reuse it again and again, rather than going in and manually typing in or building these expressions each time. So it saves you a bit of time if you're going to be using the same data set over and over again. Okay, so now I'm ready to complete my import. I'm going to add it to a new map view or fit it to the page. And it will do its importing, its filtering. And it looks like I messed up one of my expressions, because all of the populated places came in. And let me just, so yeah, at least Canada and roads and provinces was filtered. I'll have to double check what my expression for the populated places was. Maybe I can quickly redo it and import it again. Okay, so I don't want any of these layers now. I see what happened. So I forgot to include the greater than symbol for my expression. You can see down here I've got the expression I used beforehand when it actually worked properly. So I'm going to reuse the good expression, and hopefully this one doesn't make me look so so silly this time. So I'm going to add it to my World 1 view. There we go. Much better. That's how it should have come in the first time. So apologies there. And that's the layer filter in a nutshell. I know, I believe Paul Hein is here with us today. When we released 10.0, I recall seeing an email from him saying, you know, he was a little disappointed with the, okay, sorry, I'm just catching up on the chat here. Yes, thank you, Bob. My expression was incorrect there. But yes, Paul Hein, when we released 10.0, was disappointed that the attribute filter could not filter by expression. So we really wanted to get this feature into version 10.2 as soon as possible. The next feature I'm going to look at is simplify on import. As Nick mentioned, we have a few clients who have rather large data sets that often exceed the 32,000 point per path limitation imposed by Illustrator. We talked with Adobe whether or not we could get that increased. They weren't so responsive as far as helping us out there. So we went ahead and decided to address that with a simplification algorithm on import. So I've got a data set here of the Mississippi River. It's one single path, or my original data set is one single path. But to import it here, I've split it into compounds. So I have a line segment made of two I have a compound made up of two line segments. And if I open the attribute table, I can see that I have 384,384 vertices between these two, or between these compound segments. So now when I import my data, every time I import it, I don't want it to break into compounds. I would rather it stay in one individual piece. So if I import my Mississippi data set, once again, I'm going to go into the filtering options. And this time I'm going to look at the simplification section. So by default, we felt that if we were to leave it using Illustrator's simplification, which does not take into account topology or distance and area as far as removing points, we felt we were misleading users as far as what their simplification was doing, whether or not it was accurate or not. So by default, we will split lines into compounds. That's the default behavior for line data. And then for area data, we will simplify it to the vertex limit, just under 32,000 points per path. And it will also use the Douglas-Puker simplification algorithm. So I just wanted to show what the default is for now, in case you were wondering. I'm going to switch this to the legacy option. So you can see here we have 3 prepackaged filters for simplification. The legacy is Illustrator's old simplification method. It's the fastest way to import. If you're importing data and you don't care whether or not the vertices that are removed are important, or if topology is not maintained, this option's for you. Because the ignore topology or maintain topology, which do require a bit more processing time, you may think that they aren't necessary. So we do include the legacy option for those of you who aren't too concerned with the topology. The ignore topology, it's a slower import than the legacy, but faster than an import that does maintain topology. So it will use the algorithm defined in the simplification dialog, but it won't try to maintain shared borders between features. So you may end up with some gaps or some overlaps with your data sets. And then the maintain topology, as you can probably guess, the option here at the bottom to maintain topology will maintain those shared borders between adjacent polygons or lines and polygons, etc. So I'm just going to import using the legacy format just so we can compare what MAPublisher is doing compared to Illustrator simplification. So I'm going to import legacy. I'm going to get an error saying your map file contains elements that exceeds Illustrator's point per path limitation. This error is nothing new. It's been in MAPublisher for years, so I can just ignore it for now. So let's zoom right in on the Mississippi River. And if I select the original data set, so this is what was split into compounds. I am currently showing each and every vertex along this path, and you can see it basically looks like a very thick line. Well, that thick line is really just each vertex lined up right next to one another. So when I show the Illustrator simplified line, you can see that there are actually line segments that have had vertices removed. And so it just kind of moseys along and removes points here and there. For the most part, it does an okay job, but we often had users saying, hey, we need to keep this, this very detailed data. Is there anything you can do? So let's use one of the preset filters. And this time I'm not going to choose legacy. I'm going to choose maintain topology. Once again, I'm going to simplify it to 32,000 vertices, and I'm going to use the default Douglas-Pucher method again. So the import may take a little bit longer, but well, it was actually quite fast. And I can feel safe that my data is maintaining that high integrity, that level of detail that I'm looking for. So I'm going to hide the legacy data set. And now I'm just comparing the original data to the new simplified data set. So I'm going to change one of the colors for my lines. And if I was to see any differences between the two lines, I would be able to see the black outline underneath the red line. So there may have been a vertex removed right around here. I can see part of the black line. As I move along, I can see that our simplification follows the original data set quite well. And this is the simplified data set using MAPublisher versus the simplification versus Illustrator. So you can see there are some differences between the two. Just going to zoom back out for a minute. You also have the option to specify your own vertex limit. So if the 32,000 vertex limit was still making my file sizes too big, and I didn't need the level of detail that the Mississippi River was importing at, I have the option to specify a custom vertex limit. So for this one, I'm going to change this to 15,000 points per path. And just to change things up, I'm going to use this Vallingham-Wyatt simplification method. And I click OK. And let's zoom in here and take a look. I'll change my colors again just to make comparison easier. Let's do yellow. So this is compared to the original data set. And again, it lines up quite nicely with the original data, or the one that's broken up into compounds. So you can see MAPublisher is still doing quite a nice job of maintaining the high level of detail, while also showing how many vertices. Oh, sorry, I was using the wrong thing there. I went to the area. Oh, I've been playing around with this tool for too long, and everything just kind of blends together. Pardon me. I'm going to simplify this on the line tab. I was using the area tab, so if anyone was pointing that out in the chat, thank you. I just don't have it up on my screen. So let's try this again. No wonder everything looked detailed. It's because it was always breaking it up into compounds. All right, let's try this again. All right, so it's simplified my line down to the 15,000 vertex limit that I specified. It's all contained within a single path, which is what I asked for. And if I choose the direct selection tool, I can see each vertex along the path. And so compared to the original data set, which looked like a thick line, you can see that there are now some gaps between the data. Compare that to Illustrator, we can see that we're doing a much better job at keeping some of the detail for the line.
Jeff, could you just quickly show in outline mode so we get a sense of the comparison? We had a question from the audience.
Sure, yep. So the detailed squiggly line here, I can't zoom in any farther, unfortunately, but the line with the detail and the squiggles, that's the MAPublisher simplified line. And the line beside it is the Illustrator line. So as we move along, I know it's kind of hard to decipher between the two lines here, but the one that is a lot more blocky or jagged is the Illustrator path. MAPublisher's is more rounded. It keeps those smooth shapes for the line. So that is the line simplification. Now I'm going to switch over to the area simplification. And for this one, it's such a large data set that I've gone ahead and kind of pre-processed or pre-imported all of the data. That way, I don't keep you here for the next hour while we wait for it to import and simplify. So I'm just going to go through each of the imports that I completed and compare the results for you here. So I'm just going to zoom into San Francisco. This is within the San Francisco Bay here. We'll notice quite a difference between the various simplification methods. So again, this is the raw data that was split into compounds. Now you may be asking, hold on, you've split an area into compounds. When you go to apply a fill to that, what's that going to look like? Well, it's going to make your map look a little wonky. This method isn't recommended. We only offer it more or less as a way to keep your data as detailed as possible without removing any vertices. It's more or less used if you're going to be drawing outlines for countries or things like that. So if you do need to apply a fill to your layer, it's highly recommended not to use the split into compounds option. Okay, I'm going to zoom back into San Francisco. And I'm just going to pretend like I'm going to complete the import. But I'm just going to set it up. I'll cancel out, and then I'll turn on the layer that was generated. So as I mentioned, this data set is quite large. It would take quite a while to, as you can see, it takes a second or two to load, but it would take even longer to simplify. So for the first method that I'm going to do is the Illustrator or legacy simplification. Once again, it's always good to compare what we're doing versus what Illustrator was doing in the past. So if I turn on the legacy layer, it's the black line. And you can see that it generalizes some of these bays and peninsulas, and some of that detail is lost. So I'll turn that off for now. And then if I was to use the default simplification method, you can see that MAPublisher is following that green line. I'll switch to outline mode again, just in case someone's asking for it. The simplification using the Douglas-Pucher method keeps those shapes, the curves and the rounded edges around the bay or around the landform much better than Illustrator was doing. And then once again, compare it to the Viz-Vallingham simplification. It's probably a little tough to see, so I'm going to change the color from white maybe to yellow. You know what, let's just go pink. There, hopefully you're able to see that quite nicely. And there are some little blips or some vertices on the original data set layer that are dropped. Obviously, it has to drop these vertices somewhere, so eventually you will see some differences between the two import formats or simplification formats. You may have noticed while I was importing or in the simplification dialog that there is an option to reduce all geometry evenly. Here at the bottom, reduce all geometry evenly. What this does is it will take features of the same feature type and it simplifies it using the same value. So what it does is it determines what the largest or the feature that contains the most vertices. It will determine how much to reduce that feature by, and then it will apply that same value to every other feature on the layer. Now, a problem with that is it will often drop features on import, especially if they contain too few vertices. So we do have the option to prevent those features from being dropped, and a lot of the time you'll just end up with a series of triangles or three vertex features. So I have that data set loaded up here, and I realize it's black. Change it to try orange. So we don't really see too much difference here, because even though I wanted to reduce the data set by the largest feature in my data set, I told it not to drop any features. So I do end up with quite a few little triangles here. Another area you would see it is along the west coast of Vancouver. So if I disabled the prevent drop geometry, I would see a lot of these little pink areas would be dropped or not included on this layer. One more simplification file I just want to show you is that you can simplify different feature types within the same import session. And what I mean by that is if I'm going to import the states that border the Mississippi River, and I'm going to import the Mississippi River line feature as well. So I have an area feature containing the states, and then a line feature containing the Mississippi. So they're in the same coordinate system. They are the same file format. I can select both of them at the same time. And I can set the simplification settings for these two data sets at the same time as well. So once again, let's take a look at the legacy format, or the Illustrator simplification. And I'm going to add it to my existing data set. Once again, I get the your map file contains elements, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry, we've fixed that with MAPublisher 10.2. So here I've got my areas, my polygons. They have a fill applied to them with an opacity. So if we have any overlapping polygons or any gaps, we'll be able to see them. The overlapping polygons will be represented by a darker shade of a blue-orange mix, or whatever two colors are overlapping. And we'll be able to see gaps by just seeing the white artboard underneath. So if we zoom in here, I know there's one very far in here. Okay, so yeah, I had to zoom into 30,000% zoom level to see it, but we can see that there is a gap in the data here. And there's another one here. As I scroll along, there. Oh, here's our first instance of overlap. So you can see that the blue and orange mix together to make a darker color. And here's what I was really hoping to see is some significant overlap between the two. So the features were, the boundaries were not taken into consideration by Illustrator. And obviously we do have some overlapping boundaries. So I'm going to turn that off for now, and I'll show you what MAPublisher can do. So I'll go back into simplification. I'm going to choose the simplify all art together. And basically, rather than going in and manually changing each tab to the same settings, I can just enable that, and it will apply these settings to both line and area feature types. So I want to simplify, and I want to maintain topology. I don't want to keep you guys around too much longer, so I'm just going to use the Douglas Pucher method. I do want to touch on the fault tolerance. And basically what this is it tells MAPublisher how to interpret shared boundaries. And sometimes your boundaries aren't perfectly aligned, and you want to be able to say, if they're not perfectly aligned, I do want to consider them as a shared border. You can set it for a high fault tolerance. But if they aren't perfectly aligned and you do want them to stay separated, you would set it to a lower fault tolerance. So this gives you some control over how to interpret vertices or boundaries that do not perfectly overlap. But I'm just going to leave it with the default for now. And it, as I mentioned, it does take a second. If I was to bring in more intensive data like I did with the world data set, it would take much longer. So if I zoom back into the area where I was seeing some gaps and overlap before, to start, we can see that my river, the black line, lines up nicely with my borders. And then I can also zoom in where I was seeing those gaps before. I'm not seeing any more white, and I don't see any overlap of the orange and blue. So my borders haven't been maintained. I must have set a fault tolerance that was small enough to consider these vertices or shared borders to be maintained. And you can see I don't have that dark area around this little oxbow feature of the river, and my borders are aligned now. So that is simplification in a nutshell. It does take some getting used to, but it's more of an advanced feature. So if your data is over 32,000 points per path, I'm not too sure how many of you have run into this limitation, but now MAPublisher has the feature available for you to overcome that. The next up, I'm going to talk about Overprint. So Nick mentioned the ability to either have knockouts for MAPublisher layout features or elements, or you can use the Overprint method. So right now, I've got scale bar and a grid on my map. And these, the grid and scale bar were made with the Overprint option turned off. And I'll just quickly go into the scale bar to show you where the Overprint option is. So under the Appearance tab, or Appearance section, if I click on the blue hyperlink, there's a new set of icons here beside the color pickers. And this is the Overprint option. So right now, I have this scale bar set to not use Overprint. I've done the same thing for the grids. It's the same widget as far as picking your colors and line width. And when I turn off the black printing mode, and I'm in Overprint mode, I can see how the printer is going to print out the cyan, magenta, and yellow colors. And it's going to leave white spaces where my map elements containing black will be. However, if I create my grid and scale bar containing the Overprint feature, if I do the same thing and turn off the black, I notice that it's going to actually print the art underneath. And once it comes to the black, it will just print over top of all of those features. Okay, so that's Overprint. There's not much to that one. The last thing I do want to show you is we have a new preference. Some people were annoyed by the fact every time they opened the import dialog, they'd have to change their format combo box. So if you work with a lot of different file types and you just want MAPublisher to auto detect every time you come into import, there is a preference to tell MAPublisher not to remember the last used file format. Okay, so I think that wraps up my section. Apologies if you were commenting or asking questions. I didn't have the question screen up, but I'm going to hand things back over to Nick or Tara. And
we had some questions, Jeff, but we got to them.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. That was great. I hope everybody watching was able to take at least something new away from Jeff's demonstration today. And I know we ran a little over time, but I think it was all good. It was a great demonstration, so hopefully everybody found it useful.
Apologies there.
No worries, no worries. So it was a lot of information in a short period of time. So it looks like we got to as many questions as we could. If you need some time to digest, though, before some questions come to mind, don't forget, you can always send questions to us, to our support team, through the web form at help.avenza.com. And the support team will get back to you very quickly. So that wraps it up for today. And you should be receiving an email with a link to the recording of today's session in case you had any audio. I know there was a couple of people who had audio issues, so apologies for that. Otherwise, hope you found the session helpful today and useful, and we thank you for joining us. And thank you to Nick and Jeff for a great presentation today.
Thanks for joining.